On August 19, 1942, at the break of dawn on Red Beach in Dieppe, France, the landing craft's ramp crashed down like a guillotine onto the jagged shingle beach, unleashing a torrent of Canadian soldiers into the churning surf. The air was thick with the acrid tang of diesel exhaust and the distant rumble of Liberty ships offshore, while the first pink streaks of sunlight glinted off the cold English Channel waves. Corporal Dave Collins, a 24-year-old signals operator from the Royal Canadian Corps of Signals, hailing from a quiet farm outside Winnipeg, leaped forward with the desperation of a man who knew his burden could mean life or death for his platoon. His arms were locked around the bulky number 18 wireless set, a 35-pound behemoth of bakelite, vacuum tubes, and tangled wiring that served as the assault's neural lifeline, capable of transmitting Morse code up to 10 miles over high-frequency bands. Ankle-deep in foam-flecked brine that numbed his boots and soaked his woolen battle dress, he stumbled on the uneven pebbles. The pack plunged beneath the waves for a heartbeat longer than eternity, saltwater clawing at its thin rubber gaskets and zinc-plated seams like 1,000 invisible fingers. He hauled it upright with a grunt, seawater streaming from the leather straps, and scrambled toward a splintered wooden groin for cover, his heart pounding amid the staccato chatter of MG-34 machine guns nesting in concrete casemates above. Fingers numb and trembling, he flipped the power switch and twisted dials to raise battalion command on HMS Ferry Wave, the converted ferry lurking 2 miles out. Static hissed from the receiver like a mocking whisper, then nothing. Dead air. The sea had invaded the fragile innards, 9-pin vacuum tubes shorted in cascades of sparks, carbon resistors bloated and fried, bakelite insulators cracked from the thermal shock. Dave bellowed into the void, Blue Beach to command, heavy fire, request immediate, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of machine gun fire stitching the water, 75mm howitzer shells detonating in geysers of sand and shrapnel, and the screams of comrades crumpling into the surf. In that instant, he, and hundreds like him from the Essex Scottish Regiment and Royal Regiment of Canada, became isolated islands in a storm of chaos, their pleas for naval barrage from the 6 destroyers or air support from the 74 RAF Spitfires circling overhead dissolving into the ether. Operation Jubilee, the Dieppe Raid, was billed as a reconnaissance in force, a daring probing strike to test Allied amphibious tactics against Hitler's Atlantic Wall, gather intelligence on German radar and beach defenses, and seize temporary airfields for evaluation. Conceived by Lord Louis Mountbatten's Combined Operations Command and approved by Churchill himself as a morale booster after Tobruk's fall, it drew 4,963 Canadians, many fresh from training camps in England, their average age just 22, flanked by 1,000 British commandos and 50 U.S. Rangers for the flanks. What unfolded was a slaughterhouse scripted by hubris and haste. Over 6,000 troops crashed against sheer chalk cliffs honeycombed with pillboxes, miles of razor wire coiled like serpents, and entrenched 88mm flak guns that could punch through tank hulls at 2,000 yards. German defenders, alerted by Freya radar chains and reinforced Luftwaffe patrols, poured fire from elevated positions, turning the narrow beaches into kill zones. By dusk, after a mere 9 hours of hell, 60% were casualties, 907 dead, including 562 Canadians, 1,946 captured, the largest single-day surrender since Singapore, and the rest bloodied and broken, evacuated under smoke screens from the Hunt-class destroyers. Historians like Dennis and Sheila Whitaker in Dieppe, Tragedy to Triumph dissect the tactical blunders, meager air cover limited by fog and fuel, only 48 sorties flew, absent heavy tank support due to the untested Churchill, Hobart's funnies, getting mired on the shingle, overlooked enigma-decrypted intel warning of 150 coastal guns, but the raid's true phantom killer lurked in the silence. Communications collapse. Modern war thrives on the hum of radios, weaving infantry, armor, artillery, and ships into a lethal symphony of real-time coordination. At Dieppe, that thread snapped under the weight of saltwater and shock, reverting the battlefield to the brutal, blind melee of Balaclava or the Somme, where runners dashed through crossfire with handwritten scraps, only to be cut down before delivery. The culprit was as elemental as it was unforgiving: water. Swells up to 6 feet, whipped by a westerly gale, tossed the wooden LCA's, landing craft assault, into deep surf, panicking coxswains, under raking fire from 20mm flak-Vierling guns, forced frantic exits chest-high in brine that reeked of oil and cordite. The Allies' vaunted radios, like the number 18, a Canadian adaptation of the British WS-18 with its 12-volt battery pack and 5-watt output, were clunky metal boxes crammed with glass envelope tubes, enameled wire coils, and solder joints, all shielded by flimsy gaskets of natural rubber and casings of stamped steel, no match for the ocean's relentless siege or the jarring impacts of wave-tossed boats. Units splintered across the 5 assault beaches, blue, red, white, green, and the commando flanks. The Royal Regiment on Blue Beach couldn't warn the South Saskatchewan Regiment on Red of enfilading fire from the casino-turned-bunker. Offshore commanders on the cruiser HMS Cairo, blind to the carnage through smoke and spray, fed reinforcements, 50 Churchills and 27 commandos, into the grinder, where they bogged down on the fist-sized pebbles that jammed tracks and shattered idlers, desperate. Pleas for naval barrages from the 10-inch guns of HMS Albatross or Hawker Typhoon strikes from RAF Biggin Hill dissolved into ether, as signals drowned in fizzing static. Dave Collins' number 18 wasn't an outlier, it was the norm, replicated in 80% of the 200 sets deployed, per post-war Board of Inquiry reports. The sea, that ancient foe invoked in ballads from Trafalgar to Gallipoli, had muted the invasion before it could scream, amplifying a 3:1 defender's advantage into a rout. In the raid's grim autopsy, a secret War Office report stamped most secret and declassified in 1946, Allied brass tallied the toll, a 10-fold magnification of losses from self-inflicted wounds, with comms failure cited as the decisive enabler of tactical disintegration. Dieppe wasn't just a tactical fumble born of overambition, it was an engineering indictment of interwar complacency, where radios evolved from World War I spark-gap transmitters but still treated water like an afterthought. These devices, the era's neural network for combined arms, crumbled under mud churned by 105mm howitzers, concussive shock from near misses, and the corrosive spray that etched circuits like acid. With Operation Torch looming in North Africa just 3 months later and Overlord, the full-scale cross-channel invasion, gestating in the vaults of SHAEF under Eisenhower, the High Command issued a desperate edict in September 1942, fix the comms now, or the war stalls. The torch passed to Canada's National Research Council, NRC, in Ottawa, a nation of 11 million that had ballooned into an industrial titan, churning out 815,000 vehicles, 50,000 aircraft, and its own wireless set number 19, a 6 to 8 MHz HF transceiver with 5.5 watt output for tank infantry chatter up to 15 miles, from factories in Montreal and Toronto. The mandate, outlined in a classified memo from the Canadian Army's Directorate of Electrical and Mechanical Engineering, invent a sealant to render these beasts watertight. Flexible enough to flex under 50 G shocks. Shockproof against 1000-volt transients from EMP-like blasts. Factory scalable for 10,000 units monthly. A miracle in wax, silicone, or synthetic rubber to plug the leaks, drawing on Canada's nascent polymer labs fueled by wartime R&D grants totaling $20 million. Late in 1942, in the NRC laboratories in Ottawa, a squat brick building on Sussex Drive, its windows blacked out against U-boat spies, a symphony of setbacks played out amid the hum of Bunsen burners and the clink of Erlenmeyer flasks. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a 29-year-old rising star in polymer chemistry with a Ph.D. from McGill and a penchant for chain-smoking export A's during all-nighters, hunched over her scarred oak bench amid a graveyard of rejects, brittle gaskets of butyl rubber shattered by drop tests simulating LCA impacts. Neoprene seals softened to viscous sludge after 72 hours in saltwater vats spiked with North Atlantic algae, paraffin waxes weeping rivulets under simulated desert heat of 120 degrees Fahrenheit from North Africa. Trials. Another dud, she sighed, flinging a vial of failed silicone polyether blend into the overflowing bin, its label curling from humidity. The team, 20 chemists, engineers, and wartime wizards poached from DuPont and Imperial Chemical Industries, had chased the holy grail of seals for 4 grueling months, logging 1,200 experiments in leather-bound notebooks now yellowed with age. Synthetics like neoprene laced with carbon black for UV resistance, composites doped with micronized silica for abrasion tolerance, even exotic beeswax aniline blends hardened with formaldehyde, all buckled under the trifecta of tests mandated by the Army: immersion in 3.5% saline for 96 hours, vibration on shake tables mimicking tank treads at 20 Hz, and impact from 10-foot drops onto granite. The flaw was foundational, as Vance noted in a frustrated memo to NRC head Dr. C.J. McKenzie. Explosions warp thin-gauge casings by up to 0.5 mm, jolts from 88 mm bursts loosen B7 mounting screws, surf pride micron gaps at 2 psi pressure differentials. No gasket could outrun entropy, and repairs in the field, sandpapering corrosion or rewiring shorts, doomed sets to cascading failures. Pressure mounted as planners sketched Europe's D-Day calculus in chalkboard sketches at combined chiefs meetings, one Dieppe-scale blackout amid 5,000 landing craft, and the invasion drowns in its own surf. Then, serendipity struck on a drizzly November afternoon. A spilled beaker of experimental polyester resin, a plasticizing agent derived from phthalic anhydride and ethylene glycol, originally eyed for radome coatings on coastal command Hudsons. An assistant's fumble, a elbow nudge amid the clutter, coated a discarded coil assembly, a 10-turn inductance for the number 19's RF stage, in viscous amber that pooled like molten honey. Vance paused, prodding the mess with a glass rod, her lab coat stained from prior spills. As it cured under a 60-watt heat lamp mimicking field sun, the liquid underwent exothermic polymerization, hardening in 45 minutes into a crystal-clear monolith, unyielding as quartz, translucent enough to reveal the enameled wire's reddish gleam, with 0 voids per X-ray inspection. Eureka wasn't a seal, it was encapsulation, a term Vance scribbled in her journal that night. Why armor the shell, a 16-gauge box prone to dents, when you could entomb the soul? Submerge the vulnerable guts, inductor coils wound with 28-gauge copper, selenium rectifiers, carbon composition resistors, and fragile solder junctions, in measured liquid resin, viscosity 1500 CPS, add a cobalt naphthenate catalyst at 2% by weight, and cure at 80 to 100 degrees Celsius. The result, a solid plastic fortress, 2 inches cubed, impervious to flood or fury, with a dielectric strength of 400 volts per mil. No airflow for tube cooling. Mitigated by low-duty cycles and aluminum heat sinks. No repairs. Acceptable in disposable frontline gear, where sets were issued 1.5 per platoon. Heresy to purists like Britain's GEC engineers wedded to modular designs, but in war, survival trumped elegance, prioritizing 95% uptime over 100% serviceability. This pivot, from pliable barrier to rigid bastion, rewrote electronics rules overnight, birthing potting as a verb in mill speak. The resin, a thermosetting polyester doped with 20% fumed silica fillers for thixotropy and aluminum trihydrate for flame retardancy, polymerized into a cross-linked matrix tougher than bakelite, Shore D hardness 85, denser than amber, specific gravity 1.2. And thermally stable from -40 degrees Fahrenheit Arctic foxholes to 160 degrees Fahrenheit Sicilian summers. Components froze in perfect alignment, solder joints immobilized against microphonics, shockwaves diffused like whispers in concrete via the plastic's 3000 psi compressive strength. Water? A non-threat, hydrophobic surface tension repelled ingress, even at 10-meter submersion. Vibration? Nullified, with resonant frequencies shifted beyond 500 Hz. The NRC's proof of concept was savage, detailed in a 1943 interim report. 50 prototype modules dunked in brine spiked with diesel for 14 days, simulating scuttled craft, hurled from Willis jeeps over rutted Sussex fields at 30 miles per hour, strapped to 5-pound satchel charges of composition C amid claypit blasts. Post-blast, circuits sang clear on bench oscilloscopes, no frequency drifts over 50 Hz, signal-to-noise ratios holding at 40 dB. Dieppe's ghost was exorcised, not with patches, but with an unbreakable core, slashing failure rates from 70% to under 5% in trials. Early in 1943, at the RCA Victor factory in Montreal, a cavernous 500,000 square foot behemoth on Rue St. Catherine, once a phonograph plant now retrofitted with $2 million in lathes and ovens, Canada's industrial leviathan pivoted to this alchemical forge. Already birthing 800,000 25-pounder shells monthly and 1,200 radios daily, the line reconfigured under U.S. Lend-Lease blueprints. Assembly lines morphed into chemical cauldrons, no more tweezers and 60/40ths rosin core torches for point-to-point wiring. Now, pneumatic arms metered resin via peristaltic pumps into silicone molds crammed with sub-assemblies, RF front ends first, to isolate heat-sensitive tubes. The air hummed with exothermic warmth peaking at 90 degrees Celsius, reeking of styrene monomers and methyl ethyl ketone peroxides, ventilated by 50 rooftop fans to meet OSHA precursors. Foreman George Davis, a 42-year-old ex-Bell Labs man with grease-blackened nails, oversaw the ballet, precise pours at 50 milliliters per minute to avoid air pockets, vacuum degassed at 25 in Hg, conveyor ovens tuned to 80 degrees Celsius for 90-minute cures with infrared zoning, silica-laced formulas, 30% by volume, to thwart 0.1% shrinkage that could snap 0.005-inch filaments. Yield? 4,000 potted hearts per 12-hour shift, each etched with NRC lot codes, destined for the wireless set number 19, the 25-pound HF workhorse linking M4 Shermans to squad dies via B antenna whips, commands to carriers over 4 to 6 MHz bands with crystal-controlled stability. Skeptics scoffed at the Canadian concrete radios, as one Admiralty wag quipped in a leaked cable. British ordnance testers from Woolwich Arsenal, dispatched in April 1943 to verify amid chain-smoking doubts, grew converts amid the carnage of Proof Range No. 2. Vats of Mediterranean brine recycled from HMS Sardonyx trials, laced with 5% Quikrete simulant for mud? Check, functional after 30 days, impedance matching intact at 50 ohms. 20-foot tower drops onto Aberdeen granite? Check, humming at full output, no tube microphonics. Proximity blasts from 2 kg burster charges of TNT at 3 feet? The plastic scarred with hairline crazing but internals defied, no corona discharges, no parametric drifts, signal pure as mountain snow on calibrated receivers. The number 19 emerged reborn, casing breached by a 37mm AP round? Drain the external HT pack and transmit, potted modules sealed like Pharaoh's tombs. Tank hull hold mid-Sicilian Ford? The core endured, vibration damped to 1G peaks versus 15G in unpotted rivals. Waterproofing wasn't prevention, it was resurrection, with field manuals now including submersion recovery protocols. Shock resistance? A revelation chronicled in the Journal of the Institution of Electrical Engineers, 1944 in a bouncing Grant DD, duplex drive amphibious tank, or jolting kangaroo APC repurposed from priests, loose wires frayed fatally at 10 to the power of 6 cycles, encased, they rode vibrations like statues in stone, fatigue life extended 20-fold. This secret sauce, codename Resin Shield, in ultra dispatches, cascaded through the alliance, 50,000 number 19s retrofitted for Brits and Yanks by VE Day, then number 18 backpack sets for Paras, number 22 vehicle rigs for Jeeps, even Mark 7 proximity fuses for 155 mm long toms that detonated 50 feet above Tiger tanks. Canada's edge, unseen, unspoken in press releases to avoid tech theft by V2 spies, tilted the scales of torch at Casablanca and Husky in Sicily, where early pots saved 15% of sets from dust-choked failures. Planners, scarred by Dieppe's isolation, where 40% of orders never reached platoons, now gamed invasions with ironclad comms in wargames at Bentley Priory, real-time redirects via voice, AM modulation added in Mk3, fire missions mid-stride from spotters in WASPs, retreats unjammed by fallback frequencies. It wasn't glamour tech, no enigma-cracking colossus with its 1,500 vacuum tubes, but a force multiplier in polymer form, as General Montgomery noted in his Normandy diaries. The Canucks' black magic in the boxes kept the lines singing when Jerry's went quiet. Lives hinged on its whisper, a number 19 call from a Royal Hamilton light infantry runner evading an 88 ambush near Caen, a barrage walked off friendly lines saving the 9th Canadian Infantry Brigade, a beachhead held by voices unbroken amid 12-foot combers. On June 6, 1944, at 8:30 a.m. on Juno Beach in Normandy, a mile-wide scar of sand and dunes lashed by force 4 winds, a Canadian Sherman V. Cromwell of the 1st Hussars ground to a halt just above the high-water mark, waves gnawing its Christie tracks like starved wolves, hull pocked by grazing 75 mm fire from WN-19 Strongpoint. The Donald Duck snout of its waiting trunk dangled useless, bilge sloshing ankle-deep from a ruptured seam. Inside the turret, amid the reek of cordite and vomit, Sergeant Michael Mick Riley, a wiry Dubliner naturalized in Toronto with a shamrock tattoo on his forearm, wrestled snapped number 19 antennae whipped off by a near miss and the sloshing HT battery threatening shorts. The set, Canadian potted at RCA, its RF module a gleaming amber brick under the hinged lid, crackled to life on the second try, the dynamotor whining steady. Command, this is Tiger 3-1, enemy nest at grid 23 to 45, 2 MG-42s and at ditch, over. Static free, the 5.5 watt signal punched through jamming to the number 19 in LC-216 offshore. Aboard HMS Belfast, the 11,500-ton cruiser, Gunnery Officer Lieutenant Commander John Evans keyed the reply, fire mission approved, salvo inbound, stand by. 6 6-inch guns thundered in reply, 100-pound shells arcing true in 28-second flights to crater the dunes 800 yards inland. Contact held. Coordination pulsed like a heartbeat. Dieppe's drowned screams, echoed in the ghosts of 3,367 Canadian wounded, echoed no more, avenged in the salt spray. D-Day's Colossus, 156,000 souls storming 5 beaches in 4,126 ships and 12,000 aircraft, the largest armada ever afloat, demanded flawless sink across 50 miles of front, with 73,000 troops ashore by H+1. Surf higher than Dieppe's at 5 to 7 feet from a building low-pressure system, bunkers thicker with 12-foot reinforced concrete at wider standsnest points, Luftwaffe lurking with 319 fighters scrambled from Abbeville. Yet Allied nets thrummed unbroken, infantry in Bedford LCIs vectored 617 RAF Typhoons onto E-boat pens via Mayday bursts, 27th Armored Brigade Sherman sidestepped Rommel's asparagus minefields via frantic whispers on 4.1 MHz. Admirals on USS Augusta pivoted Task Force 125 on a dime, rerouting 200 LCVPs mid-channel. German radios, FUG 5 sets in Atlantic wall bunkers, shattered by our own 16-inch barrages from USS Texas, circuits fried in the bocage mud that clogged their valve bases. Their asymmetry in silence, 80% downtime per OKW logs, was our asymmetry in strength, command intact, momentum unbroken, as Eisenhower's Great Crusade message crackled from potted number 19s to foxhole ears. Juno's Little Black Devils, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, clawed 10 miles inland by nightfall to Corsoles and Berniers, securing the widest beachhead gain, the plastic heart of their 1,200 No. 19s beating steady amid 1,074 casualties. The raid's 1942 blood price, a necessary evil, per Churchill's grudging parliamentary defence, yielded 1944's triumph, fewer ghosts from misfires, comms uptime hit 92% versus Dieppe's 22%, swifter flanks turned at Carpiquet, invasions unchoked from the Seine to the Rhine. Potting saved no tanks outright, but it salvaged the doctrine, combined arms as seamless as code, enabling Montgomery's masterly can-anvil. Post-Normandy, it armored 100,000 SCR, 300 handy-talkies, 4 GIs, VT fuses that downed 50% of V-1 buzz bombs, even the Colossus Mk2's power supplies against bombing raids. Canada's failed sealant hunt, budgeted at $500,000 but yielding $50 million in savings, birthed an empire of resilience, with Vance earning the Order of the British Empire in 1945. Victory in Europe crowned the technique on May 8, 1945, but its tendrils spread global like kudzu. Demobbed to civilian frontiers under NRC patents licensed to 3M and Dow, potting sealed under-ECUs against road spray in 50s Chevys, avionics against 50,000-foot altitudes in Boeing 707 black boxes, pacemakers against 37 million heartbeats per year. By the 70s, it armored Apollo guidance computers against vacuum and 10G re-entry shocks. Today, your iPhone's MEMS gyroscopes, Tesla's 4680 battery packs, Perseverance rover's Moxie oxygenator, all echo that Ottawa spill, epoxy fortresses, now UV-curable urethanes with 5,000 psi tensile, guarding silicon soles from IP68 submersion to 100G quakes. The Dieppe dead, unwitting midwives in a tragedy that cost Canada 1 in 7 of its expeditionary force, gifted us circuits that endure flood, quake, void, a $100 billion electronics packaging industry per 2023 Deloitte estimates. Innovation's forge is failure's fire, a spilled vial in a shadowed lab, a sunk radio in Normandy surf, a beach awash in what-ifs from the ghosts of Essex Scots. Communication, that fragile thread spun from copper and code, armored in plastic, wove Allied victory and wired our age. It proved, from catastrophe springs the unbreakable, turning 1942's silence into 1945's roar. If these hidden gears of history, the mad science of midnight pivots, the grit of factory night shifts, the valor veiled and static, grip you, join our cadre of curious minds. Subscribe, ring the bell, your spark fuels these deep dives into war's wild ingenuity. Drop below, how pivotal was comms tech to WWII's endgame? Did it tip the scales more than radar or the atom bomb? Your take shapes the next tale.